Well, let's go through the first set of Sunday papers under a new Labour government with Charlie Rowley, former senior Conservative advisor. Charlie, lovely to see you.
Morning, thanks for having me.
I'm dressed in red to mark the change in government. I think it's only fair to be wearing Labour's colours on this weekend.
And England, no less.
And to be fair, that is a very good point. And England. What a penalty shootout, which we will come on to at the end of this section. But let's get stuck in first of all. What I thought was interesting about the coverage, particularly in the broadsheets, so the Sunday Telegraph and the Sunday Times, is the mention of Blair. Blair is back, seemingly, through the medium of Alan Milburn and Jackie Smith's appointments. Talk us through that, Charlie.
Yes, so Alan Milburn, who was a former minister in the Tony Blair government, actually came back in 2010 under the Tories as sort of a social media advisor, as a social mobility
That's right, yes.
Advisor. So he's very, very keen on getting the NHS up and running again. It's talking about privatisation with the NHS, so using the private sector as well as what it currently sort of has. It comes on the back of Wes Streeting's announcement when he first walked into the health department to say that the NHS is broken. So it's about bringing back people that are centrists in terms of the Labour Party, people who are probably thinkers rather than, in terms of practicalities, rather than just left-wing ideologues.
Yes.
And it'll be a very interesting time in the Department for Health.
I mean, Blair's written this op-ed for the Sunday Times in which he sort of talked about the fact that Keir Starmer needs to be quite centrist, needs to appeal to all, can't get too bogged down with sort of identity politics and wokery, which is probably good advice. But I think people are always suspicious when Blair rears his head. And I appreciate, to be fair, his foundation has got this massive event this week. So he's written in the paper to kind of preface that. But at the same time, the tentacles of Blairism might worry some people, or maybe righties should rest assured that it's actually going to be more of a centrist approach than a Corbynista one.
I think that's absolutely right. And behind the scenes, Tony Blair has been advising Sir Keir Starmer all the way through the leadership campaign, all the way before, since Sir Keir became leader.
Yes.
And obviously Blair made that intervention not too long ago to talk about actually what the definition is of a woman, to which Sir Keir Starmer then had this U-turn amazingly during one of the debates that he agreed with Tony Blair.
Oh, indeed. We live in hope. Have we had the appointment of the Women and Equalities Minister yet, though?
I think it's Annalisa Dodds.
It is Annalisa Dodds, so she's retained that brief. All right, interesting. Let's talk about that press conference yesterday then, because he basically announced, scrapping Rwanda already from day one. There's been a response to that by some of the right-wing papers saying, oh, well, migrants over in Calais are rejoicing. I'm not sure whether that's right or not, but it's interesting to kind of be starting with what you're axing. One of the themes of the campaign was we can't really nail Labour down on much. We don't really know what they're going to do. At the moment, we know what they're not going to do. They're not going to do Rwanda. We've had a little bit about James Timpson, who's the Timpson's boss, who's been appointed as prisons minister, and the fact that he's very much into rehabilitation, doesn't think that non-violent criminals should be in prison for too long, which is quite interesting. And then a bit of talk, Charlie, about realigning with the EU. Should we be worried about this?
I think if you voted for Brexit, then yes, you would be worried. You're absolutely right. We don't know what Labour stand for. I think that's part of the reason why the turnout was so low in the election, and why, as Boris was saying, I think Boris Johnson wrote in the Mail yesterday that the Labour victory is wide but thin in terms of a majority just based on sand built on sand. And it's absolutely right, because he scrapped Rwanda. This was the number one deterrent to stop illegal migrants coming into the UK. It's something that Sir Keir said he was going to do. He has done it on day one. But what is it replaced by? And, when immigration was such a big factor during the election, that's why Reform did particularly well. That's why the Tories did particularly badly, because they didn't deliver what they said they were going to do. But there are lots of communities in the north of England, and particularly communities that voted for Brexit, want to see tougher immigration rules, that want to see us deal with this issue.
I would argue that the Rwanda plan didn't seem to be that popular with anyone. I mean, the idea of controlling immigration is certainly extremely popular with most of the electorate, according to all the polling. But Rwanda? I mean, and the other problem was Rishi Sunak did miss a trick in calling an early election before any flights took off. I mean, what's your view as a former Tory advisor on the timing of all this?
Well, I think, like the majority of people, I was shocked that the 4th of July was the date, exactly as you say, because, one of your flagship policies, something that's the cornerstone of your election campaign and your whole premiership, where you've said we are going to stop the boats, and you've invested so much time and energy and money into that particular policy. I think it would have been symbolic and the right thing to do to see those flights actually take off, so you can actually go to the country to say, look, it might be just a handful of people to begin with, but I've gone further and beyond any other Home Secretary, any other Prime Minister to deal with such an extreme problem. Yes, it has to have an extreme solution, and we didn't see any of those flights take place, and I think that is a problem. And to call the election before any of those flights took place, I think was clearly an own goal, and which is why the electorate rejected the Tories so badly.
Also interesting to see in that op-ed that Blair has written that he's advising Starmer to concentrate on bringing down immigration. I think in light of the fact that, the Labour vote share is low, more people voted for the Conservatives and Reform combined than voted for Labour. And the key priority of voters on the right is to bring the numbers down. So let's see how he plans to do that. Should we talk about the Nigel problem as it's been described by Dan Hodges in the Mail on Sunday? Let's be honest, I'm going to have Richard Tice on later. It was a good night for Reform. I think they would have liked their vote share to be higher. Obviously, there's a debate to be had about proportional representation. The Lib Dems secure fewer votes and yet have 71 seats compared to Reform's 5. How do you think both left and right solve the Farage problem, Charlie? I know it's a big question.
It's the one that everybody's got to ask themselves. And if you're going to be the new leader of the Conservative Party, you've got to know how to, align with Nigel when he says things that are right. And he's been very outspoken on things that I think lots of people care about. So just take stop and search, for example. Yes. That is something I think a lot of people actually agree with, because it prevents crime. It prevents actual criminals going to prison if you can sort of catch the perpetrator early.
Yeah.
There are things that he's said that do resonate with the public. So it's about agreeing with Nigel when he gets it right, and he's a brilliant communicator. But it's absolutely tackling him and being able to tackle him when he gets things wrong. The stuff he said about Vladimir Putin, I think, would have, shocked a lot of Conservatives. The idea that he was sort of apologising, for the invasion of Ukraine because he called it 10 years ago. Well, you can't just sort of say, well, I said this 10 years ago and therefore it must be right. And
although he had a point that Boris Johnson had said similar and been called out about it by the Eye in, I think, 2016. He's also said that he's condemned Putin. And thinks the invasion was wrong. But we won't go over all of the arguments now. But the point is that whatever happens, that Reform rabble, as I think they were described by somebody at the weekend, is going to be a thorn in the side of both. But is it credible for him to think that he can lead the opposition with 5 MPs?
I don't think it's credible in that sense. I guess by his own admission as well, he won't be the opposition in Parliament, but as a voice for the nation. I think what is going to be very interesting now is to see what are Reform's plans when it comes to stopping the boats and stopping illegal migration, because he's talked about, he's criticised the Rwanda plan, fine. Some Reform, I think, candidates have talked about, turning the boats back. OK. How does that actually work in practice? Is that actually something that you can expect from Border Force, officials to actually turn the boats back if you've got a dinghy sort of, flailing in the ocean? And some of the practicalities of what Reform are actually saying, I think, are now going to be very scrutinised.
Also, the spectre of Le Pen and Bardella gaining more supremacy in France with the second round of voting going on as we speak, almost. I'm getting this impression of Le Pen and co sort of pushing the migrants in our direction, and us trying to kind of push them back. I don't know necessarily whether the rise in right-wingism over in France necessarily helps Farage or indeed this Labour government when it comes to organising how on earth the French and indeed the English deal with that channel problem. Should we talk about Tory leadership? We must, I'm afraid, Charlie. I've got Suella Braverman coming on later. You a fan of hers?
No, I think Suella will make a very, very good backbench constituents MP. And she may even appear in some other role at some other stage, but I think leading the Conservative Party, having during 2 or 3 Prime Ministers' time tarnished it, and clearly...
I see the Observer's got the runners and riders up.
Yes.
Her odds are quite high, but they're better actually for, I think, Kemi Badenoch. Penny Mordaunt now out of the race completely. There's everything to play for, but do you think they should sort of appoint somebody now that they want for the duration of the next 5 years, or should they think about an interim leader now and then regroup? IDS, Ian Duncan-Smith, thinks that they should have a huge period of reflection before doing anything and just keep Rishi Sunak in place.
So I think that might be just a little bit too difficult. I think Rishi should stay there. Look, he called the election, it was a terrible disaster. The best thing he can do for the Conservative Party, I think, is stick around a bit longer, take on the heat from being the leader of the opposition. You have to go against Sir Keir Starmer at PMQs, keep the party together, allow a contest to take place. I think it does need some time to reflect. The party needs some time to reflect. And maybe when Rishi sort of, if he doesn't want to stick around as leader of the opposition, an interim, someone that can just keep the party together, that can bring all the divisions where there have been all these new groups and factions that are popping up. We need to stop thinking about who's the popcorn and who's the new Conservative and who's the One Nation. We are a Conservative party. Yes. We are a broad church. We just need to get into the room together and focus on the policies and what do the people want, what are the priorities, and how can we actually have a plan to deliver on those. And then I think once you start to have someone that can actually take on Labour and actually, prosecute them in a sense, because we are now the opposition.
Yeah, one advantage of being reduced to 121 MPs, as awful as that's been for the Conservatives, and it's an absolutely disaster from an election point of view. But at the same time, whoever's leading that troop, they're a bit more easy to corral and control, you could argue. If you can't install party discipline with 121, then you've got no hope at all. Very quick final word on the football, Charlie. We were just speaking about it earlier. What a moment to rejoice in after a difficult week. 5 out of 5 penalties scored. Who'd have thunk it?
Who'd have thunk it, indeed. And, it was nail-biting stuff. I think, look, it still wasn't the beautiful, pretty performance that we all want and hope from the team, because they're all a great bunch of players, but they still have an issue, I think, working together, whatever that is. But, but to win a penalty shootout, something historically that England are not very good.
Especially for Saka, having missed his last time round. Yes. But there is this sense, isn't there, Charlie? Do you need to make it this difficult? Just make it easier for us to spectate this thing. And what have we got? The semi-final then, I think, next Sunday. So they've got a bit of a rest.
Is it Wednesday?
Is it Wednesday?
Yes, Wednesday night.
It's Wednesday night.
8 p.m.
Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Sorry, I've missed that then. Then so it's the final on Sunday?
Yes.
Wow. All right.
You'd already booked it into your diary next Sunday, the final. We're going there. We'll be there.
I've had to tear up my diary for 6 weeks and I need to revisit it, put some more social things in there. Charlie, it's all been work. But thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lovely to see you.